their journey and what their business and work is all about.
On any given morning in Laos, the first thing anybody hears is the call of roosters. It's nearly impossible to imagine anything else. But between 1964 and 1973, the equivalent of one B-52 bomb load showered upon Laos every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 9 years. More impossible to imagine, though, is that it was a secret to nearly everyone, except those whose lives were changed forever.
When a negative can be turned into a positive, it's the yin and the yang. This is a seed. It's a step in a very positive direction.
Everything was destroyed by bombs.
By bombs, the houses, everything destroyed.
The senior leaders in America denied that it was happening. I think it's an obscenity.
There's still dangerous bombs that haven't exploded.
He was 13 years old at the bomb expert. 5 of them died. So now he lost one eye.
UXO impacts negatively in so many different ways. It will not allow poverty to be reduced. If the father loses a leg farming, income generation, food generation is gone for that family.
Don't understand is how common cluster munitions are to U.S. forces.
What prevents the CIA from doing the same in Yemen or anywhere else?
Oh, you're on mute, Elizabeth.
Got it. Thank you.
I'll just throw in one more thing. This is open for Q&A from the attendees as well. So audience participants, please type in any questions you may have, and we will try to get to those maybe towards the end. But anytime, pop in and ask any questions that you may have. Okay, I'm gonna disappear, and you guys roll with it.
Thank you, Britta. Thank you so much for having us. You and your team have done an amazing job setting this up, and it's such an important topic, sustainability in fashion, and within that, the ethics when it comes to how things are made and who is making them, and what are the overall impacts of the supply chain. Alina, I can't thank you enough for joining me. Our two organizations have partnered up for about 10 years, and to have the Chief of Staff here telling everyone about, you know, what is the secret war and what does a legacy of war mean, I think is so incredibly important. So, you know, we've just seen the film, and it presents a little bit about the background. I think I can, you know, kind of start out answering a few questions. One is why Article 22 makes jewelry from war shrapnel and scrap in Laos. And then what problems do Article 22 and Legacies of War address in Laos? Why are there 80 million unexploded bombs contaminating the land today? So to start, Article 22 jewelry is made from detonated bomb shrapnel and other scrap aluminum. And it's very important to note that the concept was really born from local innovation. Article 22 has been a conduit for bringing that local innovation to the global fashion market. And frankly, at a time when sustainability and fashion were more like oil and water. And through this process of using art and design, we've actually created a product that has impact on multiple levels, which we'll get into in a little bit. And this film essentially presented a bit of the history and the backdrop as to why there are so many unexploded ordnance in Laos and why there is so much scrap metal as refuse that is strewn across the country. It would be great, Alina, if you could share a little bit about what is Legacies of War. What is it as a concept? And what is it as an organization?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that introduction, as well as to the IFD team and to Britta for having me. This is actually really exciting for me today because I'm used to talking to congressional offices and their staff, and so taking a break from that and talking to potentially students, people who are interested in fashion. That's really exciting to me. So thank you all again for having us. Well, Legacies of War is a international organization that's based out of Washington, D.C. We raise awareness about the history of the Sika War in Laos. We advocate for increased funding from the U.S. government to go towards clearing unexploded ordnance, also known as UXO. And you'll hear us kind of talking about UXO a lot during this talk. We also provide spaces for healing the trauma and the remnants, from war that has left many communities still kind of healing from that impact and what happened to them during the Sika War, and so we provide those spaces. And then lastly, we want to build a future of hope and try to mobilize and inspire a new generation of advocates and people to carry on this story. This legacy has to end in order for new ones to begin. So we do a lot of our work primarily in advocacy, primarily going to share the stories of survivors and victims. I also forgot to mention that we advocate for victim assistance and survivor support in Laos as well. And this is a topic that hits very close to home because I am Laotian American. I grew up in the US, in Virginia, was born here, raised here, first generation. My parents, first came as refugees, and then now I'm second generation. And so being able to talk about those stories and be able to share what happened is really important as we continue to find solutions for this massive issue that's still happening today.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about you as an organization. Legacies of War is really highlighting the fact that when a war happens, it doesn't end with a date in a history book. There are long-term consequences that are ongoing for generations. And I think your kind of three pillars around which you work that you mentioned, history, healing, and hope, are really touching upon a spectrum of time, which is the past, the present, and the future. And I know we saw in the video a little bit about the history, but could you take us kind of back at a really top line level to what was underlying the secret war in Laos? There was a civil war, and if you could just kind of lay that foundation, I think it would be a really great way to then talk about what we're doing in the present in order to make a better future, the history, the healing, and the hope.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think a lot of people have to understand Laos is a very it has a very complex history. And if you don't know where Laos is, it's a small landlocked country in Southeast Asia that's bordered by China, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia. And there's about 7 million people living there today. Beautiful landscape, beautiful ecosystem. The geography is just completely diverse. It's very green, and a lot of people don't know that it's also very mountainous. And considering the geography and where it's located in the world, Laos is known as the land of a million elephants. Once there weren't just a million elephants, it's also been rumored and passed down through oral history that Laos was the land of a million kingdoms at one point too. And so there's so much complexity there and rich history about all these different groups, with their different cultures, traditions, etc., existing in Laos way before other influences came into the country. But what the Secret War was sort of, the next chapter to what Laos would then become, right, or is today. The Secret War, no one can deny it was a secret. And during the Vietnam War era, about 270 million bombs were dropped. I really hope that number really sticks with people, because we're sort of in that phase with the U.S. right now, and elections. You need 270 electoral votes, and so that's really stuck in my mind too. I keep thinking about 270 million, but those bombs were dropped. It's an equivalent of a plane load of bombs dropped every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day for 9 years. Can you imagine, right? And the video that was just played kind of gave like an overview of that. But today, there's still millions of bombs that have failed to detonate. And right after the war, it was estimated that 80 million unexploded ordnance, or the little cluster bombs, have failed. And only less than 1% of the country in Laos has been cleared. And Secret War, I think a lot of people think, oh, one day, the US woke up and they said, we need to go and bomb Laos. That's not what happened. For many people in the US during the 60s and 70s, they had no idea that this was happening. When activists were protesting the Vietnam War, their mind was on Vietnam. But little did they know that Laos was also being affected by this. And that was because the US wanted to cut off supply chains to the northern Vietnamese troops. And by doing so, they decided to start bombing the land right by the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which runs across the border that meets Vietnam in Laos. They said, okay, we just need to bomb unmarked targets. No, doesn't matter. We're not going to pick a target right now. We're just going to bomb that area to cut off those supply chains. But they didn't know that 95% of those bombs that rained down on that area were all civilians. These were not northern Vietnamese targets. These were just civilians who were living there, and there are hundreds of thousands of people who are living in that area. And, I always like to explain that the conflict will never be, one or the other. We can't think of it as there's one side that was good, one side that was bad. It was really, really just complex in the way that Laos, was going already through their own internal tension. There was a civil war that happened previous to the Secret War occurring. And the Civil War was inspired by the desire for the country to be ruled by its own people. Laos has had a long history being oppressed by many years since the French protectorate rule and colonization, to then Japanese troops coming in and occupying during the Second World War. Then when the Vietnam War broke out, there was a threat of American imperialism and American influences. And so then we had one side, the Royal Lao, and then another side, Pathet Lao, which is now the current government in Laos. And Pathet Lao was backed by Russian and Chinese support. They were pro-communism. And, with that became this vulnerable state in which the secret war could easily happen because there was already tension there. And that kind of gives us more of a good idea of why this happened in the first place and why it's so relevant to the storytelling, I think, of what's Legacies of War is continuing to do. But I also want to mention that because of this conflict, about 350,000 refugees fled the country during the 60s and 70s, mostly in the 70s. But then afterwards, during the 80s, even more fled. So there was a big plight of refugees, which is why I'm even existing in here like today, because my parents left during the 80s, right after the war ended.
Well, I think, there's so many things to unpack in what you've just shared. And I think one point that's really key is that you can't look at this as a matter of good versus evil and kind of a binary matter. It's very layered and complex. And the fact that, as you mentioned, you're here and you're an American, that's a topic we'll get into a little later, but there are many Lao Americans who came over and are, navigating their identity as this mixed community. And that's where the healing comes in part. Legacies of War, I mentioned earlier, has these 3 pillars of history, healing, and hope. And the healing is happening both with regard to land and lives in Laos, protecting people by Legacies of War's advocacy to remove those 80 million unexploded ordnance, but also there's an aspect of healing that is happening right here in the US. And, you're starting conversations within the Lao American community. So I think it would be great to hear a little bit about what very tangibly Legacies of War has achieved for Laos. And then later on in the conversation, we'll get into what does the healing process look like for Lao Americans who are, came over as refugees or are first or second generation. So if you could just share a little bit about the impact, and then we can get into our campaign together.
Absolutely, yes. I want everyone to know, first off, we have been in existence for about 16 years now. We just celebrated our 16th birthday. We were founded in 2004. So it's been a long while that we've been around, but I am 50% of 100% of full-time staff. We're run and led by women of color who are both Laotian American. Our executive director is Sarah Gulabdara, who is amazing. Everyone should follow her. She is also an amazing force, and her story is really compelling. And I'll share a little bit more later on in our conversation. But since we've been in existence, funding that went towards UXO clearance by the U.S. government started at 1.3 million, and that was in 2008. Okay, and so when we first started advocating for this funding, that is it's tiny, that's pennies compared to how much the US spent on bombing Laos in the 60s and 70s. The US spent about $13.7 million is what was estimated, and that was it inflated dollars as well. That's 13.7 million a day bombing Laos for 9 years. It's just
unfathomable.
You can't compare. Exactly, you can't compare it. And now today, fast forward in 2020, we were able to speak to our congressional champions. We said, okay, you know what, this is the year. We're going to try to get as much funding as possible. And we asked for $40 million for the next fiscal year to go towards UXO clearance and victim assistance and survivor support. And we were granted that. It's been approved in the House. It's the highest ever approved for Laos for the UXO sector.
Congratulations. But there's an important point here, which is that Legacies of War doesn't see any of those funds. You operate out of the generosity of foundations and donors who support you to do the work to get those funds that get distributed to organizations like our partners, Mines Advisory Group, UXO Lao, and other victims assistance and mine clearance organizations. And so I think that's also something that's incredibly important for people to understand. The way you get funded is very different from the fundings you raise to do that work.
Absolutely. And, you know, at Legacies of War, we also know that our role is really important. We are not a direct service aid organization, so we do not have our own demining groups on the ground actually going around and clearing the bombs. As you all saw in the video, you know, there were, you know, they have equipment and they go and they have like a whole strategy and plan laid out to clear these bombs. We do not have that, but we are the ones leading the effort on the ground on the hill. You know, Sarah and I are up there with our team of amazing interns and our board members, and we're in our traditional Laosin, which is the Lao textile, and we're knocking on doors being like, we need 40 million. We need to clear these bombs now. And, you know, we're continuing that work. And the legacy that I do want to mention is also in 2016, when President Obama declared that, you know, they would give $90 million to the UXO sector in Laos for 3 years. That is what sort of propelled what our momentum is today. You know, where we are today, I think he was one of the only president, I think only sitting US president to visit Laos. He did that in 2016, and that has, you know, then given us more of a platform and more recognition. And, you know, I thank Janapa for that, as well as everyone who worked with President Obama to make that happen.
Yeah, I was in Laos, and I was so thrilled to hear that Chanapa is the founder of Legacies of War, and I was so thrilled to hear that President Obama had called her out in his speech. And, you know, it was incredible to me that it took until 2016 for the US government to formally recognize the secret war as having happened. And it was there during that historic trip. I mean, President Obama was also the first president who was a sitting president to ever visit Laos. So it was a huge occasion. And it's incredible because the amount of funding has gone up by 40 million from those initial days. So you guys are doing an amazing job. There is so much that we could talk about with regard to this. And I keep going back to my own moment of realizing that Laos was involved in the secret war, and that there were 80 million unexploded bombs in the land. You also mentioned the traditional dress, sin, textiles, and that's actually what brought me to Laos in the first place.
So I know that you mentioned, Elizabeth, that you were there in 2016, which I wish I was there. Everybody keeps talking about this time, and every single time I hear President Obama, his speech in Laos, where he mentioned Janapa and Legacies of War, I get chills. I'm like, I wish I was there, but I couldn't imagine what that was like. You know, Article 22 has worked to address the aspects, right, of addressing the legacy of war in Laos, as Legacies of War has done as well. But could you take us, you know, back to that time when you first went to Laos, and tell us, you know, what brought you to Laos in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that I never imagined in 2008, when I took my first trip there, that I would be there in 2016 at this kind of momentous moment in history. And it was really actually a matter of wanderlust and an interest in textiles that brought me to Laos. I had decided to leave my job at Coach in the merchandising department, and I had become very curious about what sustainability meant in the context of the fashion industry, because everyone understood at that point that, rivers were running red in China because of, harmful chemical dyes. Different materials were super, super problematic for their non-biodegradability and even the way that they were made. And so there's the environmental aspect of the fashion that we wear, and then there's also the ethical component of like who is behind the pieces, who is actually sewing and putting them together. And so one thing led to the next, and it was through a process of just researching online that I started reading about Laos and how handloom woven textiles are still very much part of the local economy. And in particular, they're dyeing fabric with, resin from insects and leaves and bark and mud and seeds. And I wanted to understand this. I was really curious. So I went to Laos with a purpose to kind of see how local traditions that are inherently sustainable might inform changes in the way the global fashion industry operates. How could it be less harmful to the environment? And so I started consulting for a few different organizations, and still have a complete love affair with Loud Textiles, but it happened that one consulting opportunity led me to meet artisans in a village where they made textiles, but also something else. They made soup spoons from the American bombs that were dropped during the Vietnam War. And it was really a moment of shock for me, because I had studied history and I said, how could I have missed this whole important chapter within the Vietnam War? And I realized that it's because it wasn't in my history books. And it was really an aha moment, to be honest. As cliche as it is, I thought, well, if they can make spoons, they can make bracelets, and I will do my best to sell them. And the idea was really, really simple. It was to quite literally buy back the bombs. So I wanted the bracelets to start a conversation and raise awareness, so everyone that wore a piece would tell somebody about it. And that would create this virtuous circle where artisans would earn more income with each bracelet that we sold, and we would also be able to contribute to our partners in the field, Mines Advisory Group, to clear some of these 80 million unexploded bombs. And so we did it. And, the first order of 500 turned into 1,000, turned into thousands. And, at this point, we are proud to say that we co-sponsor a demining team led by Mines Advisory Group. We've helped clear to date over 400,000 square meters of bomb-littered land. And the artisans that we work with are also, enjoying a sustainable local economy based around the jewelry that we create together. So it's been an unexpected journey from the first time I went to Laos and every time I go back.
Yeah, and I know that, I don't know if anyone has traveled to Laos, but, I'm picturing, because when we did go into the north, we met with some of the villagers who were also familiar with your work, Elizabeth, and the village that you work with and the artisans there. And this is in Siem Quang, which is in the northern part of Laos. And I want everyone to imagine, right, like, if you're going into your backyard, you probably see a tree or wherever, like some grass. But in Laos, there are some homes that have stilts made up of the missile casings of the bombs that were dropped by the US during the Secret War. And that was sort of like like a shock for me when I saw it, because I was like, they're everywhere. And it's sort of a part of life. And, you see now also, like when we're talking about the history, healing, hope, and how, at this point, healing is like the now, right? Like this is what's happening. People are healing from this still. Hope is what's the future. But I just remember the visual of seeing this big missile casing, just like on the floor, and there were plants growing out of them. I was like, wow, something so disastrous could also grow something so beautiful and full of life in it as well. And, when I think of the Article 22 and what you all are doing, it brings me back to that conversation that there's hope, even though there's like still so many memories and remnants of this really tragic past. We can still move forward. And so my next question for you, Elizabeth, would, to be if you could give us more of a deeper look or dive into what Article 22 is, and explain, what your current business model is and the impact that you've been able to achieve.
Yeah. I mean, everything you say is, bringing back so many memories of all the trips that I have taken there. And the reason I named Article 22 is because of this sense of togetherness and community that is behind the name. So Article 22 is named after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this particular article speaks to everyone's right to social, economic, cultural security and the free development of personality. And the article states that in order to achieve these things, it requires international cooperation and national effort to the extent that nations and communities can kind of help themselves. And I loved this name for the brand because before the Sustainable Development Goals existed, they were the Millennium Development Goals. And I was thinking about what is really sustainability. It's not just about the environment. It's also about a balance and equilibrium between the environment, society, culture, and economy. You can't have any one of those things totally out of whack and be sustainable. There has to be some sort of holistic approach. And so I really loved this name because it really celebrated those aspects. Well, the environment is the point that's missing there, but it really speaks to the social, cultural, and economic balance. And as I said, again, the togetherness that's required to achieve a sustainable state. And so because these artisans had already been serving their local community by melting the shrapnel into soup spoons, because everyone eats a lot of noodle soup for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it was just a really genius way of them rebuilding their lives. And always explaining the fact that these people had very little to rebuild with, but found a way to build a pretty vibrant local economy that now reaches customers all around the world. And so the problem as a business that we're solving is the social aspect, which we've touched on, bringing these artisan-made products to the world to help bring money back to clear unexploded bombs from the land. But we're also solving another problem, which is giving people the opportunity to buy gifts that are meaningful and actually make impact. They're good gifts that transform those who wear it in a symbolic way, as well as all of the impact we discussed. So you ultimately feel good because you look good and you've done good at the same time. And at the end of the day, the business model that we have pursued is a multi-channel business model selling online at ARTICLE22.com, at a lot of different retail events, including holiday markets in New York City, which we're very sad that we can't participate in. However, we will be participating in Washington, D.C., your home, Alina. So follow us if you're in the DC area, follow us so you can find out when we'll be there. And then wholesale. And wholesale has been a matter of selling business to business and working with a lot of different stores and online retailers across the world. So this togetherness is really about a local community and the cross-sector partners that we have, from Legacies of War and Minds Advisory Group as nonprofits to, business partners who are reselling our products, and of course, our community of buyers, of people who are wearing the jewelry and sharing and telling the story. And it makes a big difference, the whole concept of word of mouth.
Absolutely. And another thing is you did touch a little bit on the Sustainable Development Goals in Laos, and I wanted to mention that Laos has its own unique SDG, which is to remove UXO. And this is very unique to Laos, but I think collectively on the ground in country in Laos now, they have a goal to remove as much UXO as possible in order, for the society and for the economy to grow and thrive at the rate that they want to, of course, by 2030. We still, at this point, don't know exactly, we can't pinpoint exactly how many millions of bombs are still left there. There's still surveys being done. There's still work, that's being carried out on a daily basis. But I just want you all to know how big of a scale, on a huge scale this is. It's like we can't even just say, oh, today we're gonna eliminate 2 million bombs. It's not that easy. So I just want to thank you, Elizabeth, and ARTICLE22 for all the work that you've done to bring more attention and awareness to this issue.
Well, at the end of the day, I think when people know about it, they're motivated. And that's why wearing the bracelet or necklace or a pair of earrings is a unexpected and easy way to start a conversation. And I mean, we'll get into that a little later, but it's been exciting to use art and design that essentially came from the local community, a traditional method that has been able to evolve through our collaboration together. And one of, as we were talking earlier about what is sustainability and how that relates to our name, I can take you through the 4 ways that we really practice this sustainability and try to maintain this equilibrium. Culturally, they were making spoons. And so having access to a global market through a sustained supply chain that is a matter of jewelry is really making these artisans agents of change within their own communities, not just within their own family units, but within their own communities as contributors to clearing unexploded ordnance from the land. We've built upon this local tradition, and it's grown. And how they work is beautiful because socially, they are working from their own gardens amidst these rolling hills under thatched roofs at earthen kilns. And they are balancing their identities as multifaceted people, as mothers and fathers and artisans and, you know, subsistence farmers. This community is bringing food to table directly. There's not that much for them to sell. So the jewelry and the spoons have been a critical income source, but they're able to do this in a way where they work part-time outside of rice harvesting and planting periods. Their life and their way of working is, I want to say that it's comfortable. You know, they're not commuting. They've been living, you know, the Zoom life, the work remote life that we are all just discovering. They've been doing this, and that is really an incredible thing. In some ways, they're so much more ahead of where we are. We're catching up and discovering what it's like to manage and work from home, work remotely. So culturally and socially, they're in a really good spot. And economically, of course, the artisans are setting their prices and they're choosing their hours, and you know, they earn at least 5 times the local minimum wage per hour, and you know, they can make a few $100s in a day, depending upon what they're making. So there's a real transformation within the local economy, and this village has even become one of the most exciting tourist destinations in this particular province. And then of course there's the environment. So culture, society, economics, and environment. And we are practicing this sustainability in this really circular way where the material that they're using to make the jewelry is really about upcycling. It's making something that was harmful and would now be useless into something that is symbolic of love and transformation. And, you know, the funds from the jewelry help support Mines Advisory Group to clear the land, which then creates more of a metal source for the artisans to make more jewelry, and so on. And that's what we call our virtuous circle.
Beautifully said, Elizabeth. I really love that, and that's really it's really compelling, you know, to even hear like the whole strategy behind it. What do you think are or have been the key elements of Article 22's success?
So I think that collaboration really is the one word to sum it up. And, you know, this is ultimately part of the way the SDGs are presented as well. You know, sustainable development goals cannot be achieved by just governments or just, you know, public entities, nonprofits, NGOs, or just businesses or just civil society. It really is a matter of all of those groups coming together. And in our own microcosm, Article 22 has done that. You know, we have partnerships that are design partnerships with different voices in the fashion industry, the art world, as well as artists and activists. And, you know, we use more and more the jewelry as a canvas for different messages of leaders who envision a different future, a different world. They want to fix something, they want to change something, and they're doing the work on a day-to-day basis. And so the jewelry is a vehicle for, you know, our work in Laos, but there's this added layer of you know, goodness and give back that we can add. So for example, when we launched our artists and activists collaboration last year, there were different women and men that inspired us. And we thought, what if we could put their message, like be the love, or justice should not depend on geography, on our jewelry, and then use that as a way to share about their work around, sexual rights survivors and, sexual assault survivors. That's the case of our partner, Amanda Nguyen, who was a Nobel Peace Prize nominee in 2019 and who has written over 30 bills into law. She has changed the law to protect sexual assault survivors. Be the Love is the message of a incredible artist named Emmanuel Jal, who came from South Sudan, and he was a former child soldier, and he was saved by an aid worker and ultimately saved himself by using music as a way of healing. And now he has a meditation app called My Life is Art. And so our work together with Emmanuel is, raising funds for his work, working with refugees back in Kenya and South Sudan. And of course, we have our Trailblazer campaign, which we will talk about in a moment. And that's to support Legacies of War's work. But just to go back to the core word here, it's collaboration. It's about cross-pollinating audiences and coming together with like-minded individuals, because the reality is we can't just rely on our politicians. I think the past 4 years have taught us that we have to join forces, and the digital age gives us an opportunity to do that in a way that's unprecedented. And so I have a lot of hope that the Sustainable Development Goals can be accelerated because of the different collaborations and partnerships that can be formed at a distance. In a weird way, one silver lining of this pandemic is that it's allowing us to prove that when we're forced to be working with limited resources, we can still thrive. And that is actually at the core of the jewelry. The artisans that we work with that were making soup spoons proved that with limited resources, they could pick themselves up and rebuild their local economies. And I think that having limitations sometimes inspires the greatest creativity and sometimes the most sustainable solutions as well. So let's get to Trailblazer.
I'm popping in really quick here. We have about 10 minutes left, and I so hate to stop you guys. Your story is so great and want to keep listening, but also want to open it up to any questions that anyone has. But Elizabeth and Alina, feel free to keep going. And
of course.
We have 10 minutes left.
Should we follow the chat to see the questions, or how?
No, I think if there's a specific question, it comes up there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, everyone. So that's where you ask a question if you want to chime in. And there is some chat going on, but not a specific question yet. So
I do see one. It says, in your opinion, what can educators at university or secondary schools help to teach sustainability in production and consumption? So sustainable production and consumption are absolutely one of the Sustainable Development Goals that we've, been referring to. And I think that ultimately it's about taking the time to inquire and investigate. I mean, we live in a world where we have unprecedented access to information. And some of that information is really bad, and some of that information is really good. And I think that educators at both the university and secondary level can really help students decipher between what is good information and what is bad information. Where are what is a good source and what is a bad source. And I don't mean to make this a matter of binaries, because I don't believe in that, but you have to kind of hold yourself accountable in a way to seeking out accurate information. And I think there are more and more organizations that are acting as, I don't even want to use such an aggressive word as watchdog, but we could use that word, and helping consumers educate themselves, as well as being a reference point for different brands. And one example is goodonyou.eco, and it's out of Australia, but they rate brands all across the world. And what's so brilliant about the work that they do is that they rate and work with very large brands and very small brands. They run the gamut because they recognize that a lot of very small brands are true pioneers in this space. And by being small, it's in a way a blessing, because you're starting with a blank slate. You can avoid the pitfalls of a gigantic supply chain that lacks transparency when you're working directly with your producer communities and more or less selling then directly to your consumers. So I think that's really it. Educators have such a hard job to really help students decipher information and feel confident about the information and trusting it. But it's possible. It's possible to do. Let's see, are there other questions? If not, I have a question for Alina. That's always kind of a burning question for me. And it has to do with kind of representation and whose story is it to tell. And that it could be referring to anything. But in this case, this is The Secret War, and this is a story that links Article 22 and Legacies of War. And I'm wondering, what your perception was of a brand like this coming and working in parallel to your mission, but in a very different way. And I'll tell you, I've always been keenly aware of myself as a Falang. And for those of you who don't know Lao, it means foreigner. And it was a word that initially referred to French people, and now refers to anyone who is not from Laos. And I thought really hard about, my own role in this story. And ultimately, I felt that although I was not directly responsible for the legacy of war that happened before I was born, I felt complicit if I didn't do something to tell this story, to raise awareness, because once you know it, you can't unknow it. And although I could do nothing to change the past, I knew that there was something I could at least try to do to change the future. So I have one more anecdote to end if we have time, but Alina, I'd love to hear what your impression is.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I could spend all day on this, but I'll try to keep it, pretty short. And I just want to also thank you for even giving me the space, and amplifying my voice in this, because I feel like a lot of people, especially when, they're, working on a social enterprise or, want to make sure that the intent and the impact are together. This is a very valid question. Like, what is it okay for like a non-Lao person to tell this story? And the short answer is it's complex, right? I'm not, in full transparency, I did struggle with this for a long time as well. And I remember going to Laos on a study trip, Legacies of War, and you know, we were talking about, oh, you know, at the village in Sian Quang in the northern province, you know, there's jewelry being made by Shrapnel, and it's being sold and to wider Western audiences, international audiences. And I thought to myself, I'm like, why? Right? Like at first I was like, my immediate action, I'm like, why is that? Why? And then I had to take a while and research and dissect it a little bit more. The story that is being told of the Secret War and everything that's happened in between then, whether that's the diaspora story, whether that's the American story, it's a story that we're all connected to. And I think that we all have a common goal here, and that is we're trying to clear Laos. And so if the intent and the impact is matching up, I think that that is what is powerful here. We're all moving to create change. And at the end of the day, we, you know, Elizabeth, you invited me to come on here, and you're amplifying my voice. I'm being able to share my story, and you're working in collaboration with so many other people who are also sharing their stories. I feel like it's not the question of, you know, am I eligible to tell the story, or am I actually being a person and a friend and a partner, a true partner who's giving space and who is spotlighting an issue that affects so many other people, not just Laotians. It affects everyone. Because if we don't remove these bombs in the future, you know, if we look back on it, it's like, why weren't they ever removed? And then why do all these other bombs keep showing up in other places of the world? It's because someone didn't say that story. Someone didn't share that story. And to tell you the truth, the first person who shared the story of the Secret War in Laos was not a Lao person. They were actually a Falang, Fred Branthman. He was the first person to expose what happened in the Secret War, and was the first real trailblazer for what Legacies of War is today. We wouldn't even be here. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't even know anything about my own history without Fred Branthman sharing it. And just one thing about the Falang as well, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, Lena is Lao, you know, she goes back to Laos and is loved and cherished by all the Lao people. That's false. Actually, when I go back to Laos, they think of me as Falang too. And it's because I grew up in the US. You know, I, to them, am an American. I speak Lao with a funny accent, with an American accent, though I didn't think I did. And, you know, a funny story, I actually went to Thot Luang, which is like this beautiful monument in the capital city of Vientiane. And I was like waiting in line with my family who live in Vientiane and are from Vientiane. And there's a Falang line and a like Lao line for Laotians. And I was standing in the Laotian line because I'm like, I'm Lao, you know, of course I speak Lao, my family's Lao. But then they singled me out and said, you're gonna have to stand the Falang line. And at first I was like, what do you mean? You know, I felt like, oh my gosh, they don't accept me. But it's because I'm American. And yeah, that's like what I like to tell people. It's
just to add to the years of complexity of this story, right?
Exactly.
Well, ladies, I hate to call it an end. Your story is incredible, and the brand is incredible, and your work is amazing. So where could people find you if they want to look up for more information or reach out to get in touch with you?
So ARTICLE22.com and search Trailblazer to learn more about Legacies of War and our campaign to celebrate all the different trailblazers in our lives from home to the hill, because leaders are all around us. They might be our brother, sister, mother, father, child, who knows? And of course, legacesofwar.org, where you can learn all of the facts and figures and impact of this incredible organization that is truly trailblazed.
I also just wanted to share a little bit also about Trailblazer, but I'm wearing it right now. And, you know, this is also a collaboration between Legacies of War and ARTICLE22 to inspire a new generation of advocacy. This right here is an advocacy tool. It's a conversation starter. We hope that everyone in their own way can be an advocate for this issue and to work alongside us to make sure that this story is not lost and this legacy continues to bring hope for a safer future for generations to come. It was inspired by Fred Brampman and also our founder, Janapak Kambongsa, who found original drawings drawn by refugees that Fred Brampman collected himself in the 60s and 70s and brought over to the US. And please follow us on social media. I also want, if you all want to hear more stories from a Laotian American herself and her journey of the Secret War and learning more about her history, you can follow loveiswhy.blog, which is Sarah, our executive director's blog, and our social media handles at Legacies of War. We will be posting some more snippets of our trailblazers, and also all the 20% of the proceeds that we have from the bangle goes to Legacies of War. So that, kind of is the beauty of our ongoing friendship collaboration.
Amazing. Thank you, ladies, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. And we will be back again at 11:30 for our next speaker. So join us in a half an hour about, and be well. Thank you again, Elizabeth and Elena.
Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.